We began a new mini-series last week entitled Facing Our Fears at Christmas. The truth be known, all of us have secret fears. I do, you do, everyone does. And we said that 4 separate times in the Christmas story, we see God saying, don't be afraid, don't fear, don't worry, because I've got it all under control. Well, today we understand the news of the birth of Jesus Christ is really good news because we know what's going to happen because we're looking back. But it wasn't necessarily good news to the people who heard it for the very first time. In fact, some of them were absolutely scared to death. And at that very first Christmas, everyone was afraid. Mary was afraid, Joseph was afraid, Herod the king was afraid, even the shepherds were afraid. And then there was Zachariah the priest, and he too was afraid. Everyone was afraid on that first Christmas. And not only that, but the Bible tells us the entire city of Jerusalem was even in an uproar because of the news that the Messiah had been born. You see, every one of these main characters had to deal with a different kind of fear. And what's interesting as we read the Christmas story is that you and I still deal with these very same fears even today. 2,000 years later, we still have the same exact fears that they were dealing with in that very first Christmas. And we said that in many ways, 2021 has been a year of fear. It's been a tough year. And so for many people, Christmas this year is not a Merry Christmas. It's a scary Christmas. And what we're looking at for millions of people this Christmas season is not a season of cheerfulness, but it's a season of fearfulness, if we were to be honest. But the message of Christmas to you and to I is this: don't be afraid. God says it 4 times. I don't want you to fear. You see, it's not God's will or God's plan for you and I to walk around being afraid or fearful of anything in our lives. So today, I want us to continue looking at the Christmas story and how to face the fears that hold us back in our lives, that keep us from being and becoming all that God wants us to be. And what I want to do today in our time together is to finish going through the common fears that they faced at that very first Christmas. And then I want to ask us, how does that apply to our own lives? And then in our time together next week, as we think of beginning a new year, with a new year on the horizon, I want to show you the antidote to living with fear. I want to show you the secret of living fear-free based on what God told them to do at that very first Christmas. So today, let's continue to identify the fears that people had at that very first Christmas season. And so far, we've looked at the fears of Mary, Joseph, and of the shepherds. And these were, first of all, just a quick reminder, Mary had to face the fear of inadequacy. The fear of inadequacy. Second, we said Joseph had to face the fear of disapproval. He had to deal with the fear of being disapproved by other people. And then third, we said the shepherds had to face the fear of sudden change. They had to face the fear of the unexpected when they felt totally unprepared. Well, there's another character in our story who had to deal with panic when Jesus' birth was first announced. And his name was Herod, Herod the king. And King Herod faced the fear of losing control. He faced the fear of losing control. You'll remember that Herod was the king of the Jews. He was the king of the region or the area that was known as Judea, and he was hated by the Jews because he wasn't a full-blooded Jew. And so Herod was a paranoid person. He was paranoid of losing his throne, his kingship, his power. And he was so paranoid of conspiracy theories that history tells us, and not just the Bible, but the history books tell us that Herod was paranoid that his kingship would somehow be taken away and he would lose his throne. In fact, we're told that he had his own brother-in-law killed for fear of him taking over his throne. And then, as hard as this may be to believe, he even had his own mother killed. And then, of all people, his wife, he had her assassinated, and finally had his own 2 sons assassinated. Now, my friends, that is a very paranoid person, a very paranoid individual. And when he hears that Jesus, the King of the Jews, is being born, he absolutely freaks out. Why? Because he doesn't want his throne usurped. So he orders that every baby boy in Bethlehem, 2 years of age and under, is to be killed in order to try and destroy any potential rival to his throne. And so Mary and Joseph, you'll remember, are actually warned in a dream by God to take Jesus to Egypt because of what Herod is trying to do in killing him. So Jesus spends his early years in the land of Egypt, and they don't return to Nazareth until Herod dies. But you see, he was panicked. Herod was panicked by the news of Jesus being born. Matthew chapter 2 tells us his story about fear. It says this: Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the time that Herod was the king of the Jews. Then some wise men, now these were probably astronomers who studied the stars. It says they were from the east, and that is likely the region or the area known as Babylon. So they were probably what we would call today modern day Iraqis. Back in that day, they would have been considered Babylonians. You see, it was likely that, believe it or not, the Iraqis, these wise men who came to see Jesus, they saw Jesus before many of the Jews did. And the scripture says they came to Jerusalem and started asking, where is the child born to be the King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Now, we need to understand that these men were believers. They truly believed. They had studied the scriptures. They were very well versed in the scriptures that prophesied from the Old Testament that Jesus was to come, the Messiah was to come, he was to be born, and that there would be a special, star, an astronomical event that would mark that his birth had taken place. Now, it goes on. It says, when King Herod heard this news, in other words, from these wise men, when they came proclaiming what they had seen and what they understood to have happened with the birth of the King of the Jews, it says he was deeply frightened. As I said, it absolutely freaked him out and disturbed, and so was everyone else in Jerusalem. You see, when Herod was upset, when he was disturbed, when he was in panic, so was everyone else in Jerusalem, because you never knew what Herod was going to do, and they hated him. Now, we understand that the story of Herod and the wise men actually takes place about 2 years following the birth of Jesus. That's why when Herod finds out, he orders the killing of all the baby boys 2 years old and younger in Bethlehem. Now, at Christmas, we sing this song, don't we? Silent night, holy night, all is calm, you know it. But at that first Christmas, it wasn't calm. Everybody's afraid. Mary's afraid, Joseph's afraid, and the shepherds are afraid. And even 2 years later, when the wise men come to Jerusalem looking for the Christ child who is to be the King of the Jews, Herod not only goes crazy when he hears the news, but it says the entire city of Jerusalem got nervous. Well, finally, in our list of characters, or our cast of characters, we come to an old priest named Zechariah. And Zechariah had worked in the temple of Jerusalem for many, many years. His wife was named Elizabeth. And you'll remember that Elizabeth was the cousin of Mary, the mother of Jesus. So Mary, when she hears the news and has the visit from the angel that she will give birth to the very Son of God, Mary goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth and her husband Zechariah. Now, Elizabeth and Zechariah were good people, and they are now up in years, up in age. You'll remember they had prayed their entire life for a child because they wanted a baby so badly. And so they prayed and prayed and prayed, but the prayer just seemingly was never answered. And they finally had given up hope because they're up in years, past childbearing years, and they've resigned themselves to the fact that they're not going to have the baby they desire. They had just given up hope, and they were afraid to hold out hope any longer because they'd been disappointed so many, many times. Well, this leads us to the fifth fear in our story, and that fear is this. Zechariah faced the fear of being disappointed. He faced the fear of being disappointed. Now, this is a real issue. So one day, God shows up to Zechariah in the temple. He sends an angel, and the angel, this angelic messenger, says, "Hey, Zechariah, you know that prayer you've been praying all these years for a baby?" And Zechariah says, "Yeah, that's kind of my modern take on it." But he says, yeah. Well, the angel says, guess what? It's going to happen now. You're going to have that baby. It's going to be a miracle boy. Late in life, your wife is going to conceive, and you are going to have that baby. And by the way, Mary and Elizabeth were actually pregnant at the same time. In fact, Elizabeth was 6 months along when Mary visited her to announce her own pregnancy. But Zechariah had been disappointed so many, many times, he just didn't believe it. He didn't believe God. He doubted. And he thought to himself, I don't want to trust again. I don't want to hope again. I don't want to believe again. I've been disappointed too many times. You know, some of you can relate to the fear of disappointment that holds people back, can't you? Well, his story is recorded for us in Luke chapter 1. It says this: While serving in the temple, an angel appeared to Zechariah. When he saw the angel, he was confused and overwhelmed with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid. Your prayer has been heard." There it is again. I mean, the fourth time we see in the Christmas story, God says, do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. I've got it all under control. God says, I've got it covered. So again, in this first Christmas story, God assures them that they not need be afraid. Now, are you getting the point here that God doesn't want people to live fearfully? You see, whenever you're afraid of something, you're not in God's will at that moment in your life, and neither am I. And by the way, Zechariah's long-awaited son was called John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was what we call, or the Bible calls, the forerunner. He was the announcer of the Messiah, of Jesus, who said to the people, he's come, so you better get ready. God's come to earth, the greatest invasion in history. God has come in human form, so you better be prepared. But my question to all of you today, as we apply this to our own lives, is which of these 5 fears are holding you back this Christmas? Is it the fear of inadequacy? Because the fear of inadequacy is one we can all relate to. It's this thing of, am I good enough? Do I have the right stuff? Can I handle all that life throws at me? Am I really up for the task? Sometimes the fear of inadequacy becomes so big, you say to yourself, I'm not even going to try for my dream anymore because I know it won't happen. I'm not even going to give an effort. I'm not going to try, and I'm just going to give it up. The fear of inadequacy, the thought that, the fear that I just can't handle it. I'm not as smart. I'm not as cute. I'm not as intelligent. I'm not as educated. I'm not as wealthy as somebody else. You see, that, my friends, is the fear of inadequacy. Or maybe you're struggling with the fear of disapproval. You hate to be criticized. You're thin-skinned. You'd rather go along to get along because you hate the fear of rejection by other people. So you become a people pleaser instead. You're not really living your life. You're not living the life that God intended for you. You're living a life to please someone or everyone else. Some of you are trying still to please your parents, and they died years and years ago, but you're still trying to prove I'm worthy, I'm okay. Listen, if you haven't gotten somebody's approval by now, I hate to tell you this, you're never going to get it. But here's the good news. You don't need it. You don't need anybody else's approval to be happy in your life. I don't need your approval to be happy. You don't need my approval to be happy. Happiness is a choice, and you have the power to choose. You're as happy and I'm as happy as we choose to be. Vince Lombardi, the legendary coach of the Green Bay Packers, once said this, and I quote him, "Fear makes cowards of us all." That's true, isn't it? It does. The fear of disapproval. Some of you have the fear of sudden change. You hate change. You say, I want 2022 to be just like it was for me personally in 2021. I don't want anything to change in my life. But I hate to tell you this, change is inevitable. The only thing constant in life is change. If you get stressed out by change, you're going to be stressed your entire life, because everything changes day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. You've got to learn how not to be fearful in times of rapid or sudden change, unexpected change, intrusions into your life. Well, how about the fear of losing control? That's a big one. I don't want anyone messing up my plans. And how do you know when you have the fear of losing control? Well, there's a warning light that goes off. God puts it in you every time you have the fear of losing control. And you know what that warning light's called? That warning light is called worry. And worry means that at that moment in your life, when the warning light goes off, you're playing God. Or I'm playing God. You're trying to control the uncontrollable, because you're worried about something, whatever it is in your life. But worry doesn't change anything. It can't control anything. You see, when I worry, I can't change the past. And I can't control the future through worry. You see, all worry does is mess up my today and your today. You know how you know when someone is filled with the fear of losing control is when they start trying to control everyone else. You see, the more insecure you are in your life, or I am, the more we become controlling. We will try to be controlling of other people, the more insecure we become. So when you find somebody who's judgmental and they're judging you and everybody else, they're what we call perfectionists. And they're trying to project their control on you or over you. They're trying to control your life. But you see, they can't even control themselves. And the more insecure, the more fearful I am or you are inside, the more controlling we will try to be of others. But if I'm secure in my relationship to God, I don't need to control you. I don't need to control your opinions. I don't need to control your behavior. I don't need to control anything about you because I'm not worried about losing control. I've already given control of my life to the Lord, to God. How about the fear of being disappointed? Some of you have thought, I'm never going to let another person get close to me. I'm never going to let another person break my heart. I'm never going to go after that dream. I'm not even going to try. I'm afraid to trust. I'm afraid to believe. I'm really afraid to trust God. I might be disappointed again. I'm afraid to give my life over to the Lord because I might be disappointed. I'm just afraid to have hope again in my life. Let me ask you today, which of these fears have you been dealing with in your own personal life? If any of these things, these fears rings true in your life, you really need the message of Christmas, the message of hope, the message of no fear. The message of God says, I've got it in control. I've got it. It's in my hands. You don't need to worry about it. You don't need to be afraid. Well, I'm going to share with you next week the 4 solutions to overcoming fear in your life as we prepare and anticipate a new year in 2022. As always, thank you for being with me today, for taking the time to tune in and give a listen to the message. I just trust that you will have a wonderful and blessed Christmas, and I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas.